One thing I love about springtime in the garden is the different challenges that it poses for us as gardeners. We have to constantly be preparing and planning for this year's gardens. That includes plant maintenance and pruning as well. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to prune your sage plants. Back behind me here, we have some white sage and Russian sage. We're going to be pruning those up. And then I'm also going to show you guys how to do the same thing with your lavender plants. Now, you can do this in late fall if you would like to, once the plant has stopped growing. But I like to leave all of this cleanup for the springtime, because throughout the winter, all of these plants are going to help provide the birds and wildlife with some nutrients that they need throughout the winter. A lot of these plants contain seeds, so I just leave them in all winter. That way the birds can have a nutritious snack whenever they need it. So first up, let's go and take a look at our sage plants. I'll show you guys how to prune them and talk a little bit about why we do that. I know it can be hard to tell right now because I haven't done the pruning yet, but we've got 3 different main bunches here that we planted, I think it was 2 years ago now at this point. And I'm going to show you guys what you're looking for when you're pruning your plant. Now, there is a couple of different ways to do this. You can either take it all the way down to about a foot off the ground. I've even seen people go a couple of inches off the ground, or you can prune a little bit higher. If you're pruning higher, what you're really looking for is the point at which the plant goes from a dry, totally dead piece to green growth. You can basically feel in the plant where it starts to stiffen up and become more rigid. That's the point at which you want to take your cut. Or if you want to shape your sage in a certain way, if it's growing too far on one side, you can simply go down and cut a lot of that portion off way down low, just like that. So I'll do the same thing all the way across here to get rid of a lot of this growth. Back over on this side. So that's one example. You see, we took this portion of the plant and basically just chopped it right off where we start to see some more hardwood type of growth. You can do that, or you can go up higher. Usually a couple of feet above the ground is where you're going to make these cuts. You don't have to worry about damaging the plant when doing this, because it's going to shoot out so much more growth. These are very prolific growers. You'll be surprised by how much these things grow every single year if you haven't already experienced that. As you can see, we had a huge mound. That's pretty much just a single year's growth. And what we are really trying to do is making sure that the plant's energy is being directed into the right spots, right? And also the portions that we are cutting off, like I said earlier, are really just dead. It's dead plant matter at this point. So it's not really going to be doing your plant any good to have it on there, which is why pruning is definitely necessary for these sages. So I'm going to leave this one where it's at. We did a little bit of half and half. We did some shaping, and then we did some cuts further up. I'm going to zoom in real close here and show you guys what a real tight and compact pruning is going to look like if you want to go that route. So this big bush right here, that's everything that we're going to be cutting off right now. You can see it's about 4 feet tall right now. We're going to take this whole thing down to just a couple of inches above the soil. In some spots, I would say maybe 8 or 9 inches up, but I'm going to show you where we're going to be making those cuts on this one. Okay, if you guys look real closely, you can see that this really starts to look more like a hardwood. it starts to develop kind of a bark where these other shoots are soft, a little bit silky and smooth. This, if you're doing a hard cut back, you're really going to cut back everything up to the point of where you see that semi-hardwood start to develop. Cutting all these off. I usually leave like a node on there. Don't mind my rusty pruners. I will have an upcoming video on how to take care of those because sometimes they just get neglected and we've got to do some maintenance on our pruners as well. While I'm doing this, I also like to check and make sure there's no sign of disease in the plant, that there's no problem areas that should be looked into. Sometimes you'll find some parts that definitely need to be cut off. Otherwise, you risk spreading disease throughout the plant. So take a deeper look at your plant while you're doing this just to make sure you don't have any of those problems. So we went from that big bush of a plant down to just this. This is all that's left. Again, looking closer, we see that starts to look like a semi-hardwood right there. It starts to develop like a bark on it. That's the point which we're cutting to. Beautiful. I love it. This is going to flush out so much growth this year. You are going to be amazed. If you're new to growing sages, these things just grow like crazy. And on that topic, I want to talk about something else real quick after we prune up this last bunch here. For this one, I'm just going to take a bundle of it and chop it about 1.5 feet. That's almost everything with our sage plants. Let's show you guys how to do the same thing with your lavender in the springtime. This lavender we had growing inside of our greenhouse over the winter, and at this point I'm not totally sure if it's made it or not because I don't see any new growth yet. It is very early in the season. I do hope this greenhouse did its job, even though we haven't sealed it up or anything any more than it already has. We don't have any sort of heat batteries in it like tubs of water. You see a lot of people do that in the colder climates such as Wisconsin. But I think we might have just barely achieved level of heat in here that this thing needed to survive. Right now it's about 55 degrees in here. It's low, very low, high 39s, 41, 42 degrees outside right now. During the winter months, in the dead of winter, this did keep on average about 15, 20 degrees warmer than it is outside, and it's not exposed to the really harsh snow and sleet, hail, everything of that nature. So I really hope that this made it. But even if it didn't, I'm going to show you guys how to do the pruning on this. The same concept kind of holds true here. We're just cutting back a lot of this growth up until the point where we reach a harder wood, where it starts to thicken up a little bit. Usually this is going to be, if you've got a season of growth that gives you maybe a foot and a half of growth, you're going to cut almost all of that off. So year after year, it becomes easier and easier to do this because you realize where you made the cuts last year. In this case, I'm going to cut about half of our growth off that you see. Now, this is a variety that has been trained here, so this was grown specifically. I don't know what that's called. I'll think of it later. I really don't know what it's called right now, but they grow this topiary, I don't know. And they grow this, so they basically, when this thing is growing, they do the same thing. They do really heavy prunings on it to the point where this hardwood starts to develop and grow, and then they cut off the softwood. Right here is a really good example of where we're going to take the cutting. So I'm going to give you a nice zoomed in shot of that, and then we're going to start doing the work on the plant. Okay, I'm just going to strip this all back so you guys can see what this looks like here. Again, we've got more of a velvety, smooth look up towards the end here. And then right there, we start to see little edges. It's starting to thicken up a little bit and become more like a semi-hardwood. So our point at which we would take the cut is right here. We would prune all of this growth back up to here. So let's get to work. Again, this can be done in either the fall or early springtime. As long as you get it, if you're doing it in the springtime, get it done before you have a lot of growth on the plant. We don't really want to disrupt that growth. So as early as possible, before we start to see new growth in the spring, or at least too much of it, that's when you want to get this done. So as you can probably tell, I'm getting everything down that is growing down because I want to maintain this look where it's kind of like a ball up on top here. And of course, with this plant too, you do not have to worry about hurting it. This pruning process is not going to hurt your plant at all. What might hurt your plant is keeping it in a greenhouse that's too cold for the entire winter. I really hope that this thing made it. You know, worst case scenario, we do have to go and get another one this year and try covering it inside the greenhouse this year, or maybe even purchasing a more hardy variety, because this one was not labeled. So it's possible that it wasn't a hardy variety. Some of the Spanish lavenders do okay, but really there's so many varieties out there that it kind of depends, and I might have to buy one specifically for its hardiness. So there we have, the job is all finished. We took it real nice and close. We've got about 5 inches of that semi-hardwood left over, and we cut off pretty much all of last year's growth, even a little bit more than last year's growth from the looks of these. And I will keep you guys updated on if this thing survived. If you look behind me, we had our forsythia in here. That did okay, did fantastic, even in a pot. And then we have so there's some hollyhocks in these larger tubs. Then we've got some dogwoods and this Norway spruce too. Just stuff that we didn't get in the ground, and we threw in here for the winter to keep them a little bit warmer, because if you've got your plants in a pot over winter, it's a lot harder on them than if they were in the ground. So another great thing to have a greenhouse for is just keeping storage of some of these plants like this forsythia, the hollyhocks, dogwoods, etc. Well, time to clean up. Let's head back to the sages. I've got a couple of other things that I want to give you guys some tips on before we head out for the day. What I wanted to talk to you guys about was how fast this stuff can spread in your garden. Yes, you might have planted it over here a couple of years ago, but before you know it, you're going to get plants sprouting up through the rhizome growth several feet away. And this stuff is in there too. So if you don't want this overtaking your garden, that's something else that you're going to want to do every single year. Whether that's in the winter or the spring, again, it doesn't matter. But what matters is you go through your bed and make sure this is not growing where you don't want it to. I'll show you a closer look at some that's sprouting up over on the other side. Right here is where one of the original plants was. All the way over here is where they're starting to sprout up and grow out of the ground. It's almost 3 feet away just in 1 year. Again, if you don't want this to take over certain parts of your garden, make sure you keep up on it, because just like this raspberry plant that's also sprouting up from our raspberry bramble over there, they will spread, and they will spread fast, so make sure you keep up on these guys. Now, they're a very rewarding plant to have, and your hands are always going to smell great after handling them, but you got to keep your eye on them. Just tidying it up a little bit more. Not that it'll matter once all this stuff starts exploding, but I like to make it look nice and pretty when I first do this initial pruning. Wonderful. I think we're all set here. Thank you guys all so much for tuning in today. I hope you give this sage a chance in the garden, and don't let it intimidate you, because it's so easy just to hack down and get rid of if you need to, but it's also very fun to shape and work with and to grow. Again, you can use the sages for so many different uses as well. They smell almost better than anything else in the garden too, which is a great thing to have around. The pollinators love it, so there's another pro to having it in the garden. Great plant to have. I hope you guys are all having a great spring so far. Happy gardening.